And hello, everybody. While we wait for Sang-Hyup, let me just explain a bit about the session today. Basically, we have about, welcome, sir, 45 minutes for a panel discussion, which I'm sure will be a lively debate, gentlemen. And then we will have about 10 minutes for any of your questions. So if you have any thoughts or any key takeaways for us at the end, please store them up and just raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you at the end. So without further ado, let's get down to business. Welcome, gentlemen. Good afternoon. A very interesting topic for discussion in terms of public policy tools and how we can best leverage them for driving green economy growth. Let's take the broad view, first of all, and put into perspective for our audience exactly where you and your individual countries stand in terms of the green agenda, and especially the policies and the commitment that you've made to policies in recent years, the catalyst, let's say. Adnan, you can talk about every country in the world, so you're my global guy here. What would you say we should know in terms of the front-running countries? Who are the standouts, the pioneers in this field?
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, part of my occupation hazard is I don't work in one specific country. So we do projects all over the world. And to answer Rebecca's question, I think one of the things in trying to inculcate policies into green economy growth, one point that I would like to highlight before I give you a couple of examples, it's not something that can be done overnight. If you look at successful countries, they have decades of experience and decades of policy making and implementation to achieve to a particular point today. A classic example and a country that is truly admirable in that sense is Sweden. Sweden was actually the first country to establish the Environmental Protection Agency back in, I think, the 60s. The first UN conference was held in Sweden in the 70s. It was also the first country to actually incorporate carbon tax in the early 1990s. And the results are clear today. If you look at Sweden, they generate about 55% of their energy from renewables, the highest in EU. If you look at whether the air pollution control or the air pollution metric, Sweden is by far clearly ahead compared to the other EU countries. If you look at public awareness, I think there was a poll done recently, and I think generally in EU, the number was about 7% of the people thought that climate change is the most important area of concern today. That number shot up to 27% when you speak to Swedes. So I think if I look at all the countries overall, I think Sweden really stands out. There are several other countries. It's just a matter of time. I don't want to give a laundry list of all potential countries that have been very good at this, but I'll let some of my other speakers talk more specific about the countries they come from.
Thank you. It's a perfect segue from Sweden to Denmark, the Great Danes. Tell me, the story started in the 1970s, didn't it, Finn?
That's correct. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this session here. I fully agree with Adnan about it. We have a number of Nordic countries, Sweden definitely, Denmark, Norway also, which have taken the lead over the past 30, 40 years or so. In Denmark, it all started back in the early 70s with the first oil crisis, because at the time, Denmark was totally dependent on imported oil. We did not have any natural resources. So when the first oil crisis hit the world, Denmark was very severely affected, and the government and parliament at the time simply had to come up with a new energy course, decided to focus on renewables and on energy efficiency. And the means, primarily stick and carrot, stick being very, very high taxes on all kinds of energy consumption, the carrot being economic subsidies to private households, if they insulated their houses, put in new windows, to manufacturing companies, if they cut down energy consumption in their manufacturing processes, and also importantly, massive subsidies to wind turbine, the wind industry, which means that today we have the leading wind developer Vestas in the world, and Siemens, which is a German company, has all its R&D and also production in Denmark, because that's where the skills are. So I would say, to sum it up, as you said from the outset, it's a decade-long constant focus on renewables, on energy efficiency, also a lot of focus on changing the mindset of the ordinary Dane, that energy in all kinds, as well as water, is a scarce resource.
Mm-hmm. So many interesting points, not least taxes, always a popular topic. We'll be coming back to that shortly. Let me come to you, Sang-Hyup, and give me the Korean perspective.
Oh, yes. First of all, peace be upon you all, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I'd like to briefly talk about Korean experience. During the Lee Myung-bak administration, which I served from 2008 to 2013, Korea played a certain role and due part in contributing to combat climate change. Korea aggressively pursued low-carbon green growth as its national top agenda. And for example, Korea invested 2% of its GDP into green and new growth sector. And Korea introduced the emission trading scheme, first of its kind in whole Asia, now being followed by China. China will introduce nationwide emission trading scheme at the end of this year. And we also try to enhance international cooperation with many like-minded countries. So we launched the Global Green Growth Institute, which is similar to the idea of World Green Economy Organization. That started with the 16 member countries, including Denmark and UA. At the initial stage, we started that with only a handful of countries, UA, Denmark, and Australia. Now it has become more than 24 member countries in the world have developed and have developing countries. And also we successfully hosted Green Climate Fund. But to be very honest with you, we experienced rather slowdown during the past administration, but Korea is now coming back again. Mm-hmm. The current administration, led by President Moon Jae-in, took very aggressive energy transition strategy. For example, the renewable energy portion is relatively low in Korea, around 4%. But the new government is going to expand its portion up to 20% by 2030. And very eager to cooperate with the rest of the world. And now that's why Director Kwon, representing Korean government, is here to join us. Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll definitely come on to cross-border alliances a little bit later on. But Hussain, let me come to you, and please give us the United Arab Emirates perspective.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And I would like first to start by greeting the attendees. Good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. And I would like to welcome you here to the United Arab Emirates, to our visitors from abroad, and nice to join our colleagues which are based here in the UAE. Rebecca, the story of the green economy and the green growth, particularly in the UAE, started in 2012. When His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum has announced the green growth strategy of the UAE under the slogan of Green Economy for Sustainable Development. After this announcement, it was a task force which combined most of the government entities along with their stakeholders to work on the implementation of this strategy. So it took them 3 years to study what is the current status and to see what are the best practices worldwide. We worked very closely with our colleagues, which Mr. Kim just mentioned, the Global Green Growth Institute, in order to prepare our implementation of the Green Growth strategy. And it was announced in 2015 to be a full strategy to be implemented in the United Arab Emirates to divert the economy towards the green economy. This implementation starts by having 5 main strategic objectives, 6 main pillars, 12 programs under these pillars and 42 KPIs, which are monitored annually in the UAE State of Green Economy report, which is produced by the Ministry of the United Arab Emirates, Ministry of Climate Change of the United Arab Emirates. Going back to the implementation of the strategy, as we all say, one hand doesn't clap alone, and we cannot implement it alone. So we made sure that to involve and to engage every stakeholder in the UAE. So we have now 7 local entities, 5 federal ministries. Besides, the private sector is a major stakeholder with us in implementation of this ambitious strategy, which aims to achieve a lot of ambitious targets, such as resulting in reducing 4 million cubic meters of water, reducing 68 megaton of carbon emissions, reducing the greenhouse gases in the United Arab Emirates, and last but not least, creating more than 160,000 green jobs by 2030 in the United Arab Emirates. So these are the goals, and this is our ambition to achieve by implementing this strategy.
It's fantastic, thank you. And just give me an example of some of the projects that this legislation, the framework, the regulatory infrastructure, if you like. There's been a trickle-down effect, and there are some landmark green projects in the UAE that have resulted.
Of course. Let's talk first about how this strategy is being currently controlled and monitored. In 2016, December 2016, the Cabinet of the UAE has formed the UAE Climate Change and Environment Council, which looks into a lot of diversions and a lot of portfolios which are handled by the ministry, and one of them is the green growth and green economy. So it is one of the main topics to be handled by this council, and it has the memberships which I referred to previously. Through this council, the entities are working together into the 3 major components of the green growth, which are the policies, technologies, and the finance. So speaking about the finance, in October 2016, 32 of the financial institutions in the United Arab Emirates have signed the Dubai Declaration, which was announced in the Global Green, the Global Roundtable of the United Nations Financial Institution Program. And these 32 entities have pledged to finance the green growth in the United Arab Emirates, to spread the sustainability theme and aspect, and to be a support to this portfolio of the green growth. And recently, the First Bank of Abu Dhabi has launched its green fund. And today, as you all heard in the opening ceremony in the UAE, and you all witnessed the signature of the agreement between Dubai Water and Electricity Authority and Sukuk to start the first green bond in the United Arab Emirates. Very quickly spreading or screening through the other projects, currently the ministry is working on the green procurement policy, is working on the green job policy. There are a few policies which are worked out in other entities as well, such as ESMA, the Emirates Standardization and Metrology Authority, which is the green labeling as well as the eco-fueling system for the vehicles. So these are some examples of the projects which I screened through very quickly.
Yes, of course, please.
Well, yeah. Well, developing a kind of bankable and scalable and replicable project is very meaningful. In that sense, I admire His Highness Sheikh Mohammed Solar Park is a great example that shows the future direction of energy and mobility system in the end. Korea has a similar case. Well, Jeju is the biggest island of Korea, well, around 750 inhabitants, around 1,000, yes, thank you, and around 350,000 vehicles are running in Jeju Island. But Jeju is going to make itself a totally carbon-free, carbon neutral by 2030 by generating all the electricity needed with renewables, by replacing all the vehicles with electric vehicles. And to support this mega transformation, a huge installation of energy storage system is now going on. And what's meaningful is Korea, during Lee Myung-bak administration, did a world's largest test bed project on smart grid in Jeju Island. Now it is working as a kind of enabler to link all these important pillars work together in an interoperable way. Mm-hmm. So the basic idea is to create new industrial ecosystem by linking all these things together. So let me share the progress made so far. So as for renewable penetration rate, 3 years ago, only 6%. Now, more than around 12%. And the half of the electric vehicles running in Korea are now in Jeju Island. So early next year, there will be 10,000 electric vehicles. And as for a smart grid, every household will have smart meter system next year, which means 130,000 households will be equipped with smart meter. In the end, it will create V2G system, vehicle-to-grid system, something like that. So, well, it's a small step, but we are making progress by having that kind of bankable, replicable, and also scalable projects. According to our study, it can be applicable to more than 2,000 cities around the world. Mm-hmm. So yeah, leading by example, that's important, I think.
Sounds incredible. I'd like to live there myself, mean and green. In terms of Denmark, what difference has a policy made to people's lives? Because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, doesn't it? It has to be the hearts and minds of people that are one in terms of green policy to get everybody on board and to make the difference.
In all fairness, I think you can say that we were lucky in a way in Denmark that we had the burning platform back in the 70s. We had to find a new way to create a secure and stable energy supply one way or another. And it was very evident to people living in those years that we simply had to do something, and the government had to intervene. And I think one of the strongholds of the Danish system is that when it comes to regulation, we have a decade-long tradition in Denmark for broad political agreements when it comes to taxation, housing, schooling, energy also. So if you are an investor in energy, you can rest assured that the agreement, any energy agreement, will still stand even if there is a change of government, because the opposition has signed on to it. And there is a mutual agreement that if you want to change one of these broad agreements, everybody should agree to change the agreement. That has meant that we have had far-reaching energy agreements which have created stability from an investor point of view, and also laid the track for investment in renewables, reaching specific goals when it comes to energy efficiency, etc.
See, that's very interesting, isn't it, Adnan? I'll bring you in on this because it's all very well implementing new policies and trying to leverage them for growth, but if there is a change of regime, a government, a reshuffle, does that mean that all policies are potentially out the window and there's no commitment in the end?
Yeah, I think that way, I think the Denmark and even the Korea example is very interesting. I think it's extremely important to be able to decouple your policies related to decarbonizing or climate change from the politics of the country, right? I mean, we all are aware of the changes that are happening, and it's not just Trump and in the US. Australia is also reneging on some of its commitments. And as the rise of nationalism spreads across the world, which is happening quite rapidly, the risk of regressing back on some of these policies go up. So I think decoupling or delinking it, which again, I think, or institutionalizing in such a manner that the change in regime or the change in politics has little or no impact. There's actually one more point I wanted to make. You talked about the hearts and minds of people. I think it's probably the most difficult aspect or the most difficult stakeholder to address when you look at all the stakeholders involved in the climate change aspect. And I think there I'm a bit critical of the people who promote climate change marketing or policy. The first thing that you think of when you think of climate change, the first thing that comes to your mind is melting polar ice caps, or you see a picture of a polar bear stranded on a piece of ice. It doesn't connect with people, right? It's too remote for most of the people in the world. Where we are using technology for renewables, energy storage, energy efficiency, we are actually failing to use technology to change the hearts and minds of people. Big data, behavioral sciences. I think there have been enough studies done where you can target, you can target people in a very specific manner in ways that affect them the most. And this has shown, there have been some pilot studies that were done, I think in California, where they've shown that if you do things that affect them on a day-to-day basis, social competition, or whether you talk directly about the change of climate to the kids' health, this has a much more lasting impact, and people tend to react in a much more positive manner in that sense.
Okay, can I?
Yes,
can
please,
I just
Finn.
put in, because I think you're absolutely right. One of the experiences we've seen from Denmark also is that, I mentioned the taxation side. Money talks also to the private consumer. So if a consumer can see that his electricity bill will go down, he'll have to make an investment in LED lighting or whatever, or new thermostats in his house, but it is paid back in 2 or 3 years' time. And then he will start seeing that he's making money on it. And that is a key driver, I think, when it comes to private consumers.
Okay, we've come to taxes already. Hussain, I have to come to you.
Yeah.
Denmark loves taxes. The UAE has a slightly different stance, but where do we stand on that? Do people need to be taxed or maybe incentivized to get on board with green economies?
Well, before answering to that important question, I'd like to add on about how to get over political risk. Mm-hmm. Yeah, politics matters almost everywhere in the world, especially when it comes to long-lasting challenges such as climate change. The current politics shows very vulnerable aspects. Mr. Trump shows that case. And when you have electoral democracy, you need to have election. You need to buy the hearts of voters. So politics tend to fall into a trap of short-termism, populism, and sometimes anything but previous government syndrome, something like that. So to get over this kind of political risk, I think you can do 3 I approaches. First I is institutionalization. You need to do some legislation to firmly support green growth activities. For Korea, that's how we enacted the basic Act for Low Carbon Green Growth, Act for Smart Grid, Act for Green Buildings, and lastly, Act for Emission Trading Scheme. That's how those green growth efforts have survived so far. Another I is internationalization. As I said before, climate change is a global matter, does require global collaboration. So if you engage yourself with the world, you can continue the game. So that's why Korea tried their best to build international organizations such as GGGI and GCF, Green Climate Fund. Mm-hmm. The last I is internalization, which is most difficult part. You need to have full support from the people. That's really difficult, and it is taking real long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's the long fight. Hussain, let me come to you. In terms of what we've discussed, legislation, taxes, which is the best approach to get people on board?
Well, the approach which is currently being dealt with in the United Arab Emirates, as you all know, we have our 2021, which is our Golden Jubilee goals and national agenda, and one of the goals is to increase the recycle percentage of the generated waste up to 75%. But so far, we don't have any waste fees. So we are working on that by incentives, we are working on that by awareness, we are working on that by providing the facilities to encourage the recycling. And the same thing with the carbon emissions. So we have our goals. Dubai has set out a target to be the least carbon footprint city in the world. The United Arab Emirates has set out a goal to improve its ecological footprint worldwide, and by that we are trying to do this in the time being by awareness. Back in the 1960s, we were just a fuel consumption country. We were depending 100% on the fossil fuels and the emissions. And now, after 50 years only, after 50 years of extracting fuel from the ground, we see that it is not the time being to enforce taxes onto people, but we believe that by incentives it will make a change and it will shift. Recently, the electrical cars has been announced to have a lot of waivers from the fees that are being paid to the charging stations, the car parks. Now, if you have a Tesla or you have an electrical car and you would like to go to Dubai Mall in the peak time, you go there and you are sure that you have a car park available for you because they have allocated car parks for the electrical vehicles. And the main facilities, and so this incentive scheme is what the UAE currently is looking into and is working towards.
Another interesting point, sorry, Sang-Hyup, in terms of removing subsidies for fossil fuels, is this one of the fastest ways that we can accelerate ourselves towards good green economic growth? Hussain?
Me?
Or Sang-Hyup, yes?
Yeah, well, yeah, very good point. Yeah, the total subsidies given to fossil fuel is 5 times larger than the subsidy to given renewables. And if we can correct the thing is up, the things will dramatically change. And as for the policy measures, there are various policy measures, of course. You can introduce renewable portfolio system. You can add new subsidy for electric vehicles. You can add R&D for clean technology. There can be a lot of things, and you can add penalties for certain emissions. But if I had to choose one effective, powerful policy measure, that would be putting price on carbon.
Right.
That is it. Mm-hmm. There can be 2 ways. Simple way is carbon tax, which is really difficult to introduce, but Denmark did it.
Exactly.
Another way is trading, emission trading system. That's why Korea introduced emission trading system. Mm-hmm. So we are learning the cost of carbon incrementally. So in the end, the Paris Agreement is heading toward that direction in the end. Mm-hmm. So putting price on carbon would be the ultimate solution.
Thank you. And Finn, let me come to you in terms of the implementation of carbon tax policy. How easy was that for Denmark? And should this be the testbed, the showcase for other economies to do the same?
I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. Things are a lot easier in a country with only 5.6 million people, very homogeneous country, etc., in any ways. So I don't think you can replicate as such, but I think there are some good pointers that you can use in the way we have gone about it. I mean, we've also made a lot of failures, and we still have a lot of challenges, especially in the transport sector in Denmark. But when it comes to taxation, I really think that if you want to move people's behavior or consumption in a specific direction, you cannot go about it without taxation.
Taxes, yes. Adnan, what's your
Yeah.
perspective?
Just to add to what Finn and both Sang said is, it's a carrot and stick game. And carrot can work, but the time it takes is typically much longer. The stick angle works a little bit quicker, right? If it hurts you now, you're going to change your behavior today. And even there is another benefit of providing taxes or adding taxes to carbon or the emission trading system. They are the cheapest policy tools to implement. You can create all kinds of legislation and you can create all kinds of regulation. The administrative cost of implementing them or monitoring them or reporting them is extremely high. So they're not the most cost effective. The issue is, again, there is the economics and then there is the politics. Politically, of course, taxes and trading systems are not extremely popular. So politicians typically prefer going after regulations, and it's fine if it increases the administrative costs. But from a pure economics perspective, nothing beats out on taxes or emission trading systems. They are proven to be the most efficient in that sense.
But can I just add,
please.
because you reach a point, we have reached a point in Denmark where taxation means so much to the national budget that when you want to change, for instance, to become more green, you have to put even more taxes on something, and people will eventually start saying now the tax burden is too high. Or if you want to take away some taxes in order to incentivize a specific area, you will see a huge drop in the income, in the national income, or the budget for the government budget. So you really are, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place in many instances.
For sure. And just in terms of the implementation of policy or taxation reform legislation, is this better at a local and grassroots level or a national and international level? Adnan, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think we were having a brief chat earlier about this. I think so. Policy implementation, or at times even making of the policy, I think in general, again, one size does not fit all, but they're more effective at grassroots or city or district level. Again, you take the classic example of US. Even though at the national level the government is going back on some of the climate change policies, but there is so much support at the city, at the district, at the state level, that I think irrespective of what happens at the federal level, I think the states and the cities are going to continue moving forward. It's an irreversible journey for them. So and that's how it becomes effective.
Just in terms of all of the meetings, we've got another climate change meeting coming up in November, looking back on the Paris Agreement and constant UN climate change summits. Is reform happening? Is the infrastructure being put in place to propel countries towards green economic growth? Or is this all just talk at the end of the day?
This is a tricky question, but talking from the perspective of the International Cooperation Department and the Ministry of Climate Change, we are preparing always the cooperation themes or aspects or points of collaboration between the Ministry of Climate Change and the other ministries as well. And another country, and of course Korea and Denmark are considered as very important stakeholders and partners to us. But believe me that whenever they are talking together, they are putting into their consideration that they are keen to make it happen. And they are really willing to make it happen. I'm not saying that because I come from the ministry or I come from a diplomatic background or from I'm representing the government, but I don't think that this event that we are standing here in today is just made for a talk. It is made for a change. The purpose of having a change is a will within all the countries and all the participants. It is not only a talk. And just to elaborate more on that and to give a concrete example, today the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment is being attacked for what legislations they are trying to to enforce, such as the green procurement, for instance. So when we raise the green procurement policy to the cabinet, because we would like to at least to give a boost to the change towards the climate change and towards our pledge to the COP. But from the financial perspective, from the other ministries, from the challenges that they are seeing when we will be implementing this green procurement policy, then we got the fire back, and it is being slowed down. But we are still walking through this path, and we are still willing to make it happen by the aid and support of the cabinet and by the aid of support of the government. So my final answer is yes, there will be a change. I am sure of that, but it is challenging path that we need to go through with, and it is a difficult thing to achieve. It will not be very easy.
For sure. Thank you.
Well, as
sorry,
for the Paris Agreement, yeah, it is absolutely, we made a great achievement. Actually, Copenhagen laid a foundation for that, even though apparently it ended without real results, but it played a key role in making Paris Agreement workable in a kind of bottom-up approach by adopting NDC, nationally determined contributions. Yeah, this is a historical agreement, but we made a kind of constitution for a new climate regime that will start its mission from the year 2020. The rule book for that constitution has not been made yet. So we are going to finish making the rule books by next year. You need to pay close attention, for example, the clause Article 6, which is about how to enhance cooperation among nations by introducing various cooperative mechanisms. ITMO, which is internationally transferable mitigation outcomes, that would be a nice way to boost up various international cooperation in the EU. We will see the details, not this year, but next year. We are going to explore the possibility. So what I'm trying to say, yes, we laid a very good foundation for a new global climate regime, but we need to prepare details. We are making rule books for that. So I'm hopeful about that.
Okay, we're rapidly running out of time. We have time for maybe one question from the floor. If anybody has anything they'd like to contribute or ask of our panelists, please raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. In the meantime, while you're thinking about your question, I'll just jump in and ask, in terms of technologies, are they getting cheap enough, fast enough to accelerate green economy growth? Adnan, what do you think?
So I think in terms of renewables, certainly the case. I think if you look at the price of solar panels or price of wind turbines today, most of the countries can now deploy them without any subsidies. I think, however, that creates another problem of intermittency, and hence the price of energy storage now needs to come down at the same rate, or if better, even faster than the cost of renewables. That's one angle, right? Because it's always a race against time. We will get there. Energy storage is going to get cheaper, right? Overall, energy is going to get cleaner and cheaper over a period of time. The question is, can we get there fast enough? And price is always relative. When you talk about price of renewables, or you talk about price of demand side or energy efficiency, you're comparing it with fossil fuel, which Sang just earlier mentioned, right? They are significantly subsidized. If you start valuing the true cost of fossil fuel, removing the subsidies, including the environmental costs, including the health costs, societal costs, that itself can make the alternatives look very attractive today. So while, yes, the prices and the technology needs to come down, it's a comparative race between the hydrocarbons and the alternatives.
Always a race against time. I'm going to give the final word to you, Finn. We've touched upon financing and the need for more capital and private investment in the green space. Is there anything we can do in policy terms to accelerate that? We've heard of examples in the UAE and certainly banks teaming up with private entities, but what would be a Danish perspective on this?
Well, I think, generally speaking, we need much closer public-private cooperation, which will also drive this even further. When it comes specifically to investment in the green transition, I think the way to look at it is that we haven't had time to discuss that today, but if you take an investor point of view, what you see on a global scale is that many of the big shareholders, they are divesting their investment in fossil fuel-related industries and companies. And this trend is going to move even further, I think, in the future, which will put a pressure on them, on the companies, to start becoming more energy, moving toward clean energy in their energy usage. That again will drive down the price of clean energy, and I think also it will help channeling the way money flows into green investment eventually.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking my esteemed guests for their comments today. Oh, we have a question?
Yes.
Please, sir.
Well, after that,
You're against the clock, but go ahead.
Yes. Hi, my name's David Benson. I'm from UCL. I guess my question is about whether we think carbon pricing is really going to be enough. I've heard a lot of what you've been saying here, and I just reflecting on how Dimitri Zengelis, who's the lead economist at the Grantham Institute at the LSE, says that the challenge with climate change is that the source of emissions is so pervasive across our economies that it can't be solved at the margin through costs, but needs to be structural transformation in our economies. Is carbon pricing, are there more things we can do to augment carbon pricing so that we get not just marginal change over decades, but transformational change in the next 5 years?
Gentlemen.
Maybe I'll give it a start. Of course, there are other things apart from the stake or the taxing carbon, and a lot of scientists are talking about it. And the big arena, which is extremely controversial, is geoengineering, where you talk about either removing CO2 from the atmosphere at a very rapid rate through geoengineering the planet, or even scientists talk about reducing small percentage of sunlight that falls into it. Of course, I think there was a recent study from the US that has I think unequivocally said that that's not the way to do it. It's simply because we don't fully understand what are the unintended consequences of such a large-scale engineering at a global level, right? But that doesn't mean that things are not being worked upon in that direction. If you want something transformational in 3-5 years, something extreme has to be done. But the problem with doing something extreme is you just don't know what you're setting yourself up for down the road.
Thank you.
Let me add, yes, as the gentleman raised, yeah, it's quite demanding and very important thing to putting a price on carbon. And as he rightly said, climate change is not just a matter of environment, it's a matter of total economy, including energy. Sometimes it is about the whole civilization. So that agenda is so comprehensive. And as for the price, yeah, oil and gas has certain universal price. In the end, there will be a universal price on carbon. But at this juncture, we are developing a kind of linkages between heterogeneous policies, because every country has a different circumstance. Every country adopts different policies, even though it aims the same direction. So there as been comprehensive studies are undergoing to interlink those heterogeneous policies together. So as for the universal price on carbon, it will take long time, maybe 2030.
Okay.
But in the end, we will have it, I think.
You heard it here first, 2030. That's the headline.
I don't know for sure.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking my esteemed panel for their comments this afternoon.